want to tell you about the worst trade I ever made. On one side of it, 5 years of a real relationship, an apartment full of shared memories, a man who had never once given me a reason not to trust him, and a version of myself I actually respected. On the other side, one night, one single night that I had built up in my imagination into something so much larger than what it actually was, with someone who turned out to be so much smaller than I had convinced myself he was. I made that trade with open eyes, and I have been living in the aftermath of it every day since. Be honest, would you have made the same choice? Before you answer, I want you to understand what it feels like to be 26 years old and suddenly, inexplicably convinced that your life is too small, that something is passing you by, that somewhere just beyond the edge of the life you have chosen, there is a version of living that is more vivid, more electric, more fully alive. I want you to understand that feeling, really understand it, before you decide what you would have done. Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and stay with me. Because the part of this story that matters most is not the night itself. It is everything that came before it and everything that came after. His name was Marcus. We had been together since I was 21, which means we grew up inside the relationship in the way that people do when they meet young. We learned each other before we had fully learned ourselves. He was 23 when we met, working his first real job, still figuring out the shape of the adult he was going to become. And I was barely out of my second year of university, full of opinions about everything and certainty about almost nothing except that this person, this warm, earnest, quietly funny person, was someone I wanted beside me. For the first 3 years, we were inseparable in the way that early love makes you inseparable. We spent weekends doing nothing in particular and making it feel significant. We had the same fights about the same small things and the same reconciliations. We built a vocabulary that was entirely our own, references and jokes and shorthand that only the two of us understood. We moved in together at year 2, which felt enormous and then immediately felt obvious, like something that had always been true. By year 4, the obviousness had become the whole texture of the relationship, which is not a tragedy. I know that now. Comfort and familiarity and the deep, unhurried knowledge of another person is not a lesser form of love. But at 25, I did not fully know that. At 25, I had started experiencing the comfort as a ceiling rather than a foundation, and I was too confused about the difference to name it correctly. Marcus worked long hours that year. A promotion he had worked toward for 18 months had finally arrived, bringing with it a level of responsibility and pressure that absorbed most of his available energy. He was not absent on purpose. He was absent because he was genuinely overwhelmed, genuinely trying to build something for both of us, and he showed up for me in the ways he could while the ways he couldn't quietly accumulated. I tried to bring it up. "I feel like we've lost something," I said one evening. We were at dinner, a restaurant we had been to a dozen times, comfortable and familiar. Like we've become really good at coexisting, but we've stopped actually connecting. Marcus put down his fork and looked at me. "I know I've been distracted. I'm sorry." It's not just distraction. It's like we don't surprise each other anymore. We don't ask each other things we don't already know the answers to. He was quiet for a moment. "That's what being with someone for 5 years feels like, Mia. It's not a bad thing." "I know it's not bad," I said. I need it to feel like more than habit." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Tell me what would help." And I sat there and I didn't know how to answer, because what I wanted wasn't something he could schedule or plan. I wanted to feel, spontaneously and without effort, the aliveness that I had felt in the early years. And wanting that from someone who already loved me, fully and faithfully, was asking for something that no long-term relationship can consistently provide. I understand that now. Then, I interpreted its absence as a problem in Marcus, rather than a limitation of my own expectations. I started going out more that year. Not deceptively, Marcus knew, Marcus encouraged it. He wanted me to have my own life, my own friends, my own social existence beyond the apartment. He was not a controlling person. He trusted me with the specific, open-handed trust of someone who has never had a reason to do otherwise. His name was Dom. I met him at a birthday party for a friend of a friend, in a room full of people I mostly didn't know, which is its own particular social environment. The one where you can be whatever version of yourself you feel like being, without the weight of existing context. He was standing by the window talking to someone I recognized, and when he turned and our eyes met across the room, something happened in my chest that I had not felt in a long time. I want to be very precise about that feeling because I think it's important. It was not love. It was not even the beginning of love. It was novelty. It was the specific electric charge of being unknown to someone attractive, and the awareness of being looked at with fresh eyes, and the intoxicating freedom of having no history with someone. I mistook that charge for significance. That was the first mistake. We talked for most of the evening. He was clever, attentive, easy to talk to. He asked me questions that felt interesting, and I answered them feeling interesting, which was an experience I had quietly been missing. At the end of the night, we exchanged numbers with the casual ease of people who are pretending they don't both know exactly what they're doing. I did not tell Marcus I had met someone I was attracted to. I told myself there was nothing to tell. He was just someone I had talked to at a party. People talk to people at parties. I told myself that with the specific firmness of someone who is arguing with their own instincts. We started texting. Within a week, the texts were frequent enough that I moved the conversation to an app Marcus didn't have on his phone, and I want to sit with that detail for a moment, because it is the detail that tells the real story. I took a logistical step to conceal a communication I was telling myself was innocent. Those two things cannot both be true simultaneously. I knew what I was doing. I was simply choosing not to use that knowledge. Dom lived in a different part of the city and worked in an industry entirely separate from mine, which created a convenient geography of separateness. There was no risk of overlap, no chance of accidental discovery. It felt, in that specific way, safe. And I think that sense of safety was part of what allowed me to keep going. The comfortable distance between this thing and my real life made it feel less real, less consequential, less like a choice I would have to answer for. The texts escalated over 3 weeks. Not dramatically, just steadily, in that specific creep of familiarity that happens when two people are paying close attention to each other and neither of them is creating any resistance. He was good at paying attention. He remembered what I had said 3 days ago and referenced it. He sent things that made me laugh when Marcus had already gone to sleep, and I was lying in the dark next to the person I loved, laughing silently at a screen, which is a specific image I have never been able to look at directly without shame. There was a Wednesday evening when Marcus came home late and distracted and kissed me on the forehead as he passed, the way you kiss someone when your mind is already elsewhere. And I sat on the couch feeling invisible and small, and I picked up my phone and opened the other conversation, and within 30 seconds was somewhere that felt warm and seen and wanted. That contrast, the coldness of feeling overlooked followed immediately by the warmth of feeling chosen, is how these things build. Not through dramatic gestures, through tiny emotional transactions, repeated enough times that a dependency forms before you notice you've formed it. Dom suggested meeting. He said it casually, the way you suggest something you've been thinking about for a while but want to land lightly. Just dinner. Just two people who enjoyed talking to each other, continuing a conversation in person. I said yes on a Thursday. I told Marcus I was having dinner with a friend from work. The lie came so easily it frightened me, and then I filed the fright away and got dressed and went. Dinner was 3 hours. He was everything the text had suggested, quick, charming, comfortable in his own skin in a way that made the whole evening feel effortless. Toward the end, I remember looking across the table and thinking, with a clarity that should have been a warning, I am about to make a decision I cannot unmake. And I sat with that thought for approximately 10 seconds before I pushed it somewhere I couldn't see it. I want to be honest about what followed, without detail that isn't the point. What I will say is this: I had constructed an elaborate fantasy around what that night would be. In my imagination, it had taken on a kind of mythological weight, this experience of intensity and aliveness that would be worth whatever it cost. That was the story I had been telling myself for weeks, building it up in secret, polishing it until it shone. The reality was ordinary. That is perhaps the most clarifying and devastating thing I can tell you. It was just an ordinary night with an ordinary person, and in the middle of it I felt, with terrible precision, the size of what I had gambled against it. I thought about Marcus asleep in our apartment. I thought about 5 years of someone who had never once failed to show up for me, and the contrast between what I had and what I was doing with it was so stark and so sudden that it felt like cold water. I drove home that night understanding, with a completeness I could no longer negotiate with, exactly what I had done and exactly what I had done it for. And those two things did not balance. Marcus was awake when I got home, sitting up in bed, reading. He looked up when I came in, said, "Hey, how was dinner?" And the normalcy of it, the uncomplicated warmth of it, was almost unbearable. "Fine," I said. "I'm tired, I'm going to shower." I stood in the shower for 20 minutes and I did not cry. I was beyond crying. I was in the specific cold place that exists on the other side of a bad decision, where the feeling isn't dramatic anymore. It's just the flat, permanent weight of something that cannot be undone. I spent the following 2 weeks attempting to return to normal life through sheer determination. I stopped texting Dom completely and without explanation, which was cowardly, but was also the only thing I was capable of. I tried to be more present with Marcus, more engaged, to address the gaps I had allowed to become justifications. But guilt is a terrible interior companion. It makes you perform rather than connect. I was more attentive and less real, and I think Marcus could feel the difference even if he couldn't name it. The discovery happened through something so small it is almost absurd. A notification from the app I had used appeared on my phone's screen while Marcus was holding it to show me something funny. One message. A name he didn't recognize. Not explicit, just enough to produce a question. "Who's Dom?" he asked, casual, not suspicious yet, just curious. I felt every muscle in my body go still. Someone I met at a party. "Why is he texting you, on an app I've never seen on your phone?" The pause before my answer was long enough to answer for me. He looked at me, and in his face I watched the casual curiosity become something else, something careful and braced, the expression of someone who has just understood that they are about to hear something that will change things. "Marcus, tell me the truth. Whatever it is, just tell me the truth." I told him, not in installments, not softened or managed. I sat on the edge of our bed in our apartment full of 5 years of shared living, and I told him the truth. His face went through something I cannot fully describe, not anger, not explosion. A series of quiet recalibrations, like a person updating their understanding of something they thought they knew completely. When I finished, he was silent for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, "Was it worth it?" 3 words, not cruel, genuinely asking. Wanting, maybe, to understand what I had found that he hadn't been providing. "No," I said, immediately without hesitation, not even slightly. He nodded very slowly. "Then I don't know what to do with that," he said. Here is the secondary thing I hadn't anticipated. 3 days after I told Marcus, Dom messaged me, not through the app, through a number I had forgotten he had, to tell me that he was in a relationship. That he had been in one the entire time. That his girlfriend had found out he had been texting someone and had confronted him, and he had told her it was nothing, that nothing had happened, that it had been meaningless. Meaningless. The word sat in front of me like a verdict. I had risked my entire relationship, my 5 years, my person, for something the other participant had immediately and without hesitation described as meaningless. I had built it into something large and significant in my private imagination, and it had existed, for him, as almost nothing. I have held that information for a long time, and I still find it difficult to fully absorb. Not because it changed my culpability. It didn't. I made my choices independently of his context, but because it so completely deflated the story I had been telling myself. The significance, the aliveness, the sense that something important was happening, all of it had been entirely internal. A fiction I had written and then acted inside. Marcus and I stayed together for 3 more months. We went to therapy twice, which is not nothing. He was willing to try, and so was I, and we both sat in that room and tried to understand what had broken and whether it could hold weight again. But there was something in the dynamic that had shifted fundamentally, and we both felt it. And I think we both knew, though neither of us said it first, that what we were doing in those sessions was grieving rather than repairing. He ended it in May, gently, with the dignity that had always been one of his most defining qualities. He said, "I don't think I can look at you without thinking about it," and "Aunt want to spend the rest of my relationship doing that. I deserve more than that, and honestly, so do you." He was right. He was completely, unsentimentally right, and the rightness of it was no comfort at all. The months after were the loneliest I have ever experienced, lonelier than I had felt inside the relationship when I had been complaining, privately, about the comfort and the familiarity and the feeling that something was missing. That loneliness, the real kind, the kind that comes from actual loss rather than restlessness, put everything into a perspective I wish I had found a different way to reach. I lost a person who genuinely loved me. I lost the apartment we had made into a home, which I could not afford alone and had to leave. I lost the easy intimacy of his family, who I had spent 4 Christmases with. I gained nothing that I had gone looking for, nothing that had been worth the cost of a single one of those losses. I am 28 now. I have spent 2 years doing the interior work that I should have done instead of what I did, understanding where the restlessness came from, understanding the difference between a relationship that is genuinely wrong and a relationship that simply requires tending, understanding that the feeling of something missing is almost always a conversation before it is a justification. I want to tell you something that I believe completely from the inside of this experience. The aliveness I was looking for was never in another person. It was in me. It was in choices I was not making, conversations I was not having, parts of my own life I was not tending to. I looked for it in the wrong direction, at enormous cost, and found nothing. One night, one ordinary, unmythological night, for which I traded something it took 5 years to build and 5 minutes to destroy. If you are feeling that restlessness right now, that unnamed hunger, that sense of something passing you by, please hear me when I say, turn toward your life. Turn toward your person. Have the conversation you've been avoiding. Tend the thing you have before you find out, the way I did, exactly what it is worth. Because I know now, and I would give almost anything to have known it sooner. Leave a comment if any part of this reached you. Share it if you think someone needs to hear it, and I will see you in the next one.